Oh, I heard a cat following me out here today. Okay, we'll follow up a little bit on something here. I talked about the planes that the EU was supposedly financing for Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is still demanding to be let into the EU, though my understanding is in order to do this, to actually let them in, that there's really no method of doing this, but there has to be an agreement, and I think there's like 27 countries in the EU, and they all have to be in unanimous agreement for this to happen. And that ain't likely to happen. There's some that are all for this, but some have a little cooler heads in there. They're not going for this, because that opens a big can of worms there. But as far as these planes go, now I see today an announcement that the pilots for these 70 planes have arrived in Poland to pick them up. Well, now the countries that these 70 planes were supposedly come from deny having anything to do with this. They say they are not giving up their planes, though the EU claims that they have financed this deal. So I'm not really sure where these planes that these pilots are going to pick up are, or if they even exist. Because these countries are pretty solid in their denial that they're supplying these planes. Well, and at the same time, like the EU says they're financing them, but Ukraine now has like $57 billion in debt, and they are demanding that this be just wiped off the books. So all the stuff that they've been buying for the war effort is supposed to turn into donations, and countries like, say, Turkey, they bought drones from Turkey. And that's another problem. But now they don't want to pay for them. But these drones from Turkey, because Russia owns the airspace now. Nothing is flying that isn't Russian, except we do have, the U.S. has drones there. They don't want to talk about it, but we have drones involved observing. I don't say they're actually participating in the fighting, but the Turkish drones are. Now this is a kind of a funny deal, because like people have said, it takes like years of training to operate these drones. Now Turkey just bought these drones. You're telling me these people immediately learned how to use these drones to any effect? I don't think so. I think NATO is operating these drones that came out of Turkey. I don't know, but there's something suspicious there, because you can't tell me you can just pick this up, Anyway, so these pilots are there to pick up their airplanes. And I thought, okay, like I say, Russia completely controls the airspace. They control all the airports. So they're talking they were going to base them in Poland and fly these EU-owned airplanes out of Poland to make strikes in Ukraine, and then, if they survive by some miracle, fly back into Poland? Well, I think if that happens, you're probably going to get airstrikes in Poland. I think they might have a right to target any airfield that these planes are flying out of. That's a pretty risky maneuver. in the same way, all these weapons that they're sending in now, they can't fly them in because, like I say, airports are shut down. So they were going to truck them in on the same roads that the Russians are purposely leaving open for civilians to evacuate the area. They're going to run truckloads of weapons in. I mean, that's going to be a disaster. I don't know how they think they can do that. You're putting a lot of civilians at risk, but there's a problem here. They, like I said, they're arming all these civilians. Well, I know the one day I was watching, and the guy who used to be the president of Ukraine before Zelensky got in, the guy that was like king of corruption, he's there with a force of volunteers. They're going to fight, and he was giving a speech the one day, yammering on, and he's got all these people standing behind him, and these volunteers, holding their rifles, and all of a sudden, one of the guys behind him, clink, his mag falls out and hits the ground, and it clinked. It didn't, like a full mag goes bump, it doesn't clink. So this mag was empty, which is smart probably when you're dealing with amateur volunteers, Well, I would have thought they'd have stopped and did a kind of a take two, but they didn't. They plowed on, and then later I saw the same video, and they had moved the picture in so the guy with a mag flopping out wasn't in the picture anymore. But now, when you see all these volunteers, who, if they're pulling you off a train, giving you a gun and say, okay, you volunteered, how volunteered are you? And they say this is leading to big troubles in the city, gangs shooting back and forth, and it's just a total mess. So now when you see these volunteers in pictures, you'll notice they don't have mags in their guns anymore. They're carrying an unloaded weapon. Now, if you're carrying an unloaded weapon, you're not a civilian anymore. If you're carrying a weapon and you meet the opposing force, they're not going to say, oh, yeah, you're fine, you're a civilian. They're going to take them out. But it has come to the point where, to the government of Ukraine, a dead civilian has way more propaganda value than a live civilian. So that's how they're using them. In fact, I saw, when they were talking about that island out in the Black Sea where they had, that whole rigmarole, and they had picked up these Russians. And I saw some interview, or the Russians had picked up some of these Ukrainians that were stationed on this island. And I saw some interviews with the guys out there, that had been on that island, and they were pretty miffed that their government just abandoned them out there. That, they were just left. And there again, there was a funny thing, like as they hauled them off this island, they're heading into Crimea, and the ships in this fleet were attacked by Ukrainian boats disguised as civilian merchant ships. Like a dozen of them. They sank like a half dozen of them. But, are you going to, they know they have the prisoners on there, so you're going to sink this ship? You would sooner have your people who have been taken prisoner dead rather than captured. A dead hero was, oh, now I got the dog. Back out. Printers are handy. But when that was going on, they said there was a U.S. drone that they claim was directing this operation, from above. So that's a little iffy. I think, like I say, the EU, they're having some restraint on this, but I think they're going to get us dragged into it or get NATO dragged into it some way. Like I say, if they start basing these fighters out of an airfield in Poland, there's going to be problems. But this thing has been that way all along. They make things happen to escalate this all the time. Everybody keeps pushing. I have never seen, we've never had a war that was so open to propaganda. Oh, there's that handy dog. Now I got a complete disaster. Yeah, I should have left that alone. But we'll see. Like I say, these planes now, if they actually turn up, and if they actually manage to go into Ukraine and come back without getting blown to smithereens, I don't see how. But if they go back into Poland, then what happens? That'll be the question.